everybody, Jeff, your executive gardener. Welcome to another special episode. Happy 4th of July to all my friends in the United States, and hello to everybody else around the world that's watching and subscribed to my channel. So this episode is going to be another episode of worm castings. So I posted a worm casting video a few weeks ago. Go take a look at it. I'm switching all of my worms from a Rubbermaid tub over to the worm in. Now I'm not going to show you what the worm in looks like. You can look at the video from a few episodes ago. But essentially here's the problem I have. In Houston, Texas, it's 80 to 100% humidity. It's about 100% degrees. The problem I have in the Rubbermaid tub is that the castings, the paper, everything that's in that tub is just getting too moist. So I got a lot of great comments, but some of the comments were about, well, put less food and more paper and all that. I tried that. Quite frankly, it just doesn't work. So I don't know if you can see here, I'm standing still. I haven't been exercising, but I'm actually sweating. And that's the problem you have here in Houston, Texas, or any environment where it's 80 to 100% humidity. Everything is always wet. It's great for your skin, for moisture and all that, but the other problem is that everything stays damp. We have issues with mold, mildew, and anything that wet environment creates a perfect atmosphere for mold and mildew. Well, the same thing with my worm composting bin. Because it's not the worm in and it's constantly staying moist and damp, I even put it in the sun and it stays damp. That humidity keeps the moisture up. So what I'm going to do is I'm switching everything over to the worm in. In the process, the purpose of this video is to show you an easy method that I found to comb through the worm castings. So if you have worm castings like mine that are a little bit damp, I'm going to show you an easy way to go through it. Rake through these things, keep the worms, transfer them over to, in this situation, the worm in, and get good compost. So let me give you a close-up of what I'm doing to make it easy. It may benefit you if you have damp worm castings. Okay, before I get started showing the process, let me just remind you again. So here's the Rubbermaid, I don't know, it's 25, 30 gallon tub, and there's the castings at the bottom. We've got some newspaper. Again, very damp, very moist. I'm going to take my worms, transfer them from here over to the worm in. Okay, that's what this is. Kind of a canvas bag and a lot more air for it to breathe. It stays drier as opposed to the damp over here. And I'm going to get a close-up here, but let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a scoop from here. I'm going to put it into the sifting, and that's where I'll give you the close-up of the camera. And then you'll see me be periodically picking out worms and then putting them into here, their new home. So let me give you a close-up on what an easier way is to sort through damp worm castings. All right, so let's start the process. See here, so I have a screen here, and this is meant to sift through the castings, as you see there. And inside here are the castings that drop out, okay? So what I'm going to do here is take a scoop from the bin, put it into here, and you can see right away just how absolutely damp this is. So, but I can see right away there's some worms that are on the top right here, and so I'm going to take these worms and stick them into the worm in like I showed you, and as such, stick them into the worm in. But what I'm going to do is, and you can also use this, I'm using a little plastic rake. I use that because what that does is it doesn't kill the worms. If you use something metal, it'll go right through the worm and kill your composting worms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out as many of the worms as possible. So the idea is to pick out the worms here, and once I do that, the idea is to sift this. As such, the worms stay on the top of this grate. And you can buy this online. I'm not sure where I got it, but look up online on Google, worm casting grate. And on the bottom, you'll see here's a simple 2.5 gallon bucket. I take the worms out, put them into their new home. And the problem, as you'll see, and I'll show you here, is that these castings are good, but they're all damp and they're stuck together. And to get them to go through this grate, it's very difficult. So what I'm going to have to do, and again, I want to keep the worms on top and I want the castings to go through the bottom. So let me pick out all the worms first, and then I'll show you how I use this tool and this sifting tool to sift through all the damp castings and to give me a better finished product at the bottom of this 2.5 gallon bucket. All right, so most of the worms are out of this, and let me just show you. Most people want to know what composting worms look like. That's a close-up on my finger now. You really should be wearing gloves when you're composting, because the oils in your hands can get on the worms and just kill them. But I wash my hands really good here, but they're not that big. This is an African Nightcrawler. They're not as big as, you know, the Nightcrawlers you would find on your back lawn and so forth, but that's what they look like. They eat a ton of food, and I'm going to put that guy right into his new home, into the worm in. But a lot of you are probably the hate worms are probably your skin's crawling right now. But long story short, let me show you what I'm going to do here, and it makes it real easy. You take the plastic rake and you simply rake over this grate like such. Now, there's going to be some worms, and some worms may fall to the bottom. That's okay. I'll show you what I do afterwards to make sure I find them. But as you go along here, you're going to find other worms in here. And I just use this simple tool, this plastic rake, to pick them up and put them into the worm in. But long story short, you're going to be raking it through. And what it does is it breaks up the clumps and allows it to allows the castings to fall underneath. So as such, it goes really well. Otherwise, or you can try shaking it like this. The problem is shaking it like this still leaves the clumps, and I'll give you a close-up. It leaves those clumps, those damp clumps of castings in place. Using the rake, you can kind of break it down, push it through as such. And now what you see here is there's a lot of white in here still. Some of it's a little bit scraps of newspaper. I'll give you a close-up. Some of it are eggshells, but there's nothing wrong with that. Eggshells obviously contain calcium, which will be good for your plants. Nothing wrong with the calcium. So this is what I'm going to do now. There's a worm right there. I'll try to get them up. Some of them are kind of small, so it's hard to get them up. So that's another small little worm. I'll put him in the new home. But inevitably what happens is that some of the worms fall to the bottom, okay? So the easiest thing to do in this situation to see if there's any worms that have fallen through the screen is just rake through it, and as such, and you'll see if there's any worms. Now when you find one, like there's one right there, pick them up, put them back into your new home. Simple as that. So what you're seeing here is worm castings, and again, they're still a little bit damp, but I continually turn them like this and make sure that, and again, you'll see a lot of white eggshells in there. Just keep turning them like such, and it'll start to break up those clumps where you want to be. So the other thing I wanted to say about worm castings, I get a lot of questions, does it smell? The answer is no, they don't smell. No smell at all. And for those that did not see my previous video, you know, worm castings are kind of a thing that are easy to use, but a lot of people don't really understand what worm castings are. And worm castings are actually not compost at all. So vermiculture, which is what we call worm castings, it's actually a kind of a cold digestion process that occurs in the worm. And the castings, which are the feces of the worm, create beneficial biological agents for your plants. So what you should always do is take, you know, a bunch of these castings and mix them in with your potting mix or your soil, and they provide an unbelievable amount of beneficial bacteria, fungi, and over 10,000 different biological species for your plants. The organisms that are created by these worms and the feces or the castings that we're seeing here, really what it does is it provides conversion mechanisms so your plants can easily or much easier access the nutrients that are in your soil, like N, P, K, you know, magnesium, calcium, all those type of things. So if you actually look at the castings themselves, there's very little of the N, P, and K. It's about 1% N, nitrogen, 1% phosphorus, and then 1% potassium. But I'd say the benefits of these worm castings, they're easy to use, is that it will give you improved plant growth. It'll give you those beneficial nematodes, which are essential for root growth. I should say positive root growth, because there's beneficial and not so beneficial nematodes, but the castings create the beneficial nematodes. It gives you fungus control. So if you live in an environment like Florida or Georgia or Texas or any place that's real humid and you have a problem with fungus because of the humidity, it gives you control on that. It has proven to repel some insects as well. And as I talked about, the feces or the castings provide over 10,000 different biological organisms that are contained in this bucket right here. So a lot of good things. So again, this episode was meant to show you an easier way if you have the situation like I have where you have worm castings that are clumped together in a very humid environment, to sift them through the sifter into a bucket as such. If you have any questions about how this can work for you, if you live in a humid environment, give me a call. Hope you've enjoyed this quick episode on the executive gardener and taking damp worm castings and sifting them and making them available to your plant. Please subscribe to this episode if you haven't done so already. Hope everybody has a great week. Bye.